in order to see if there is indeed consistency in the data with the story that we're trying to tell. Yeah?
Could you clarify that a little bit, Stacey? When you say the non-signatories,
well, some countries will sign and some will not in the data set.
okay, so the okay, I see. Okay.
Either now or later, could you tell us a little more about the mechanisms whereby signing and then being thrown out after torture decreases the cost?
Oh, so you're wonderful. You really are. All right, so. That's exactly where I'm going. Okay, so what we're going to do is build a model which incorporates the CAT enforcement scheme that I'm going to talk about in a second. And in particular, that there is some cost associated with acceding to the CAT. I'm going to show that the model makes predictions that are consistent with the existent observed empirical regularities, in particular that of Hathaway and her 2007 finding that some sign and some don't. We're going to predict that signatory governments survive longer in office than observationally similar non-signatories. Okay, countries that sign as opposed to those that don't sign but are otherwise very similar. And we're going to predict that treaty accession will in fact lower torture in those countries that sign. And we're going to provide some empirical tests in order to support these claims. So the question that Tom asks is there any basis for my claim that signing the CAT adds to the costs associated with torture? The standard view is no. The standard view is that the CAT is basically window dressing. It's not worth the paper it's written on. The agreement does not specify any punishment if you engage in torture. The agreement, the standard view is that there's no coercion mechanisms, there's no enforcement, there's very little monitoring, and there's nothing in the agreement that provides for, say, the support of the emergence of domestic NGOs that might facilitate monitoring or enforcement or compliance. The standard view is it's pretty words that might make some people feel good if they sign it or if they don't. There are also normative stories about communities that share common norms, that the emergence of the agreement changes preferences in some significant way. I'm going to put a lot of that literature aside for now and focus largely on the material elements of the story. I'm going to claim that in fact the CAT does provide an opportunity for non-trivial costs associated with torturing if and when an authoritarian leader is evicted from office. Article 4 of the text says that if you sign the agreement, you must make torture a criminal offense under your domestic law. Okay. And Article 8, which I think is the crucial element, because this is the first of the human rights regimes to do this, Article 8 applies what's become known as universal jurisdiction. That is, that all signatories must treat torture as an extraditable offense. All right? So what that means is that if you indeed find yourself evicted from office as a torturer, as an authoritarian torturer, and you run into exile, and the new government wants to try you for your crimes against, for your crimes of torture. If the home government wants to, the new home government wants to do that, the country to which you have run to exile is now obliged to extradite you back. Okay, if the country is a signatory. If the home country is, for whatever reason, unable or does not have the capacity to try the ex-torturer for crimes, the country in which they have exiled themselves is now obliged, under the terms of the agreement, to try you. And if they're unable to do that, they're obliged to extradite you, the torturer, to some country that does have the capacity in order to do that. All right? And so, if and when you are removed from office, there are indeed added costs to you as a torturer or as an individual who is authorized torturer of engaging in these kinds of activities. So what we have now is a greater potential for criminal prosecution with real non-trivial penalties for doing so. Okay? most likely to be enforced when stepping down from office. And so if a government does indeed choose to undertake torture and sign the agreement, they are clearly doing so, fully understanding that now torture has become a more serious offense. Yeah?
I just had a quick question that is not my area of expertise, but I was reading recently that current and past Israeli leaders are not traveling to the EU. Is that a case study in the effectiveness of your, I mean, is that specifically because of this convention, or is that because of EU law that Israeli leaders are afraid of being prosecuted?
I don't know the details of that particular case. There are other courts that claim jurisdiction, the European courts indeed are willing to now arrest and try individuals for crimes committed outside of Europe. And so this notion of universal jurisdiction is becoming broadened as part of the jurisprudence of many of these international courts. The point about the cat is that it's specifically and actively written into the agreement as part of the law and the text. Any other questions? Yeah.
But is your claim then that European governments are more likely to prosecute tortures from regimes that are signatories to the cat than they are to prosecute tortures from non-signatories?
Under international law, irrespective of whether or not you are a signatory to the cat, you have an obligation to try or at least bring to justice torturers that have tried to claim exile in your country. However, if you also happen to be a signatory of the cat, that imperative becomes much more obvious and clearly defined. So while there's the vague notion of international responsibility that applies absent your signature, if your signature's in the cat, then you are obliged under the terms of the deal to actually do so.
Right. So if a European or non-European government is a signatory, they're more inclined.
They're more inclined.
But are they more inclined to go after, this is a question of whether the torture came from a country that was a signatory. Is your claim that European governments, whether or not they're signatories to the cat, are more inclined to go after torturers from countries that are signatories to the cat than from countries that are not signatories to the cat?
I would imagine that the legal imperative is indeed greater if the individual comes from a country that signed the cat. And the archetypal case is that of Pinochet in Chile, right? Which is that a British court authorized extradition to Spain because Spain wanted to try Pinochet for crimes committed during the dictatorship. But the British court specifically ruled that they were doing so on the basis of the crimes that were committed after Chile had signed the cat. That the crimes that the Spanish wanted to try him on that happened prior to their accession to the cat held lesser weight for the British court in that decision.
Thank you.
Yes.
Sorry, one more question. For the model and the assumptions, I was just wondering if you could just say a little bit more about the assumption that signing the cat signals to the domestic opposition that the regime is tougher. I'm just trying to better understand the logic.
How about I put up the model,
Okay.
and then we can then discuss whether or not the assumption makes sense. Is that fly?
Perfect.
Okay, so the effect, so just to finish up on the intuition of the story here, government is going to, by signing the thing, is going to put itself at risk of prosecution. If we assume that the likelihood of prosecution and the severity of the punishment is in fact going to be increasing in the level of the torture practice, what we're really seeing is that by signing the cat, you are increasing the marginal cost of engaging in torture. And therefore, governments with low pre-existing marginal costs of repression will suffer least from the signing the cat, and therefore signing the cat acts as a credible signal of indeed that you are a low-cost torturer. All right? So simple separation of types in a pretty standard signaling game is the way we're going to proceed. Consider two players, the government, G, and a domestic opposition, D, And the government or the opposition will hold or earn rents R from holding office if